Hello and welcome to a very special Film Ireland podcast in partnership with Still Voices Film Festival, which runs from the 15th to the 19th of November in Ballymahon, County Longford. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm chatting with Birth, Rebirth director Laura Moss about her really powerful film. Birth, Rebirth will screen at 7 p.m. on the 17th of November as part of the festival. We at Film Ireland are really sorry to hear this will be the last year of the festival, which was always warm, welcoming, an absolute brilliant crack with a really banger of a programme every single year. So we'll see you there from the 15th to the 19th in Ballymahon. Thank you so much for chatting with us. Oh my God, what an incredible, visceral but beautiful. The pacing is gorgeous. It's so sensory but like violent, and I think it just captures that experience of being a woman and even how it deals with the healthcare system and how, you know, like you're kind of filtered through that. And I don't know, I just wanted to say, I, as a film fan, oh my God, I could not recommend this film more than anything that I've seen in the last long amount of time. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And it's lovely to hear that, you know, when you're working on a movie, you get kind of lost in the weeds and you're like, I hope it connects with someone. So I'm always very happy to hear this.
I just want to go into a little bit about how you got to this point with your work. Like, how did you kind of get to this as a creative and know these are the things that you want to look at?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, I read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein when I was a teenager, and I was obsessed with it. I think not least because the other fiction I had read by women was, you know, classic fiction in high school was about marriage and manners and petticoats, and I just couldn't relate to it. And so when I read Frankenstein and I found out this very young woman wrote it, it was really inspiring to me. And I think, you know, for a lot of my life, I've been trying to escape the category of woman. And, you know, Victor Frankenstein, I mean, he's plagued, he's troubled, but in so many ways that character feels so free. And I fused that character in my mind with Mary Shelley herself, who has, you know, a really difficult history of loss and grief and miscarriage. And I thought, all right, what if this doctor were a woman? And of course, when I really explored the reality of that possibility, my female Dr. Frankenstein was a lot less free. You know, she had to deal with her body in order to do what she wanted to do with her mind. And that became, you know, a really deep thing for me to explore. When I made the film, I was in my late 30s. And so I feel like issues around sort of fertility and choosing whether or not to have children and reckoning with the aftermath of those choices, those themes sort of naturally infused themselves into the movie, just because it was what was going on in my life and in the life of, you know, the people closest to me.
And one thing I think that the film does so well in creating sort of almost like a triptych of different characters representing different like positions on motherhood, where you have you have like these three very conflicting women and three different very specific journeys, and how about they're so different. No one is good, and no one, like, you're watching it going, who's the antagonist? Who there's no clear like who's a villain, because I think Judy's character, you understand what she is doing at any moment. You even, you know, I don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty of the film, but you, like, she's put in really a difficult situation and just has to do what she has to do, and I think there's no one that doesn't identify with that as well.
So yeah, no, I agree. I don't think there's an antagonist. I think the sort of like alienation of modern life is the antagonist, if that sounds pretentious, but I think it's true. And, you know, in many ways, the bond that Rose and Celie, our two protagonists, form with each other is sort of a bulwark against that isolation that happens in the medical system, that happens in New York City, that happens kind of to people everywhere now.
And the theme is, you know, Rose and Celie, sorry. What they are sort of bonded in their own way, and it's something that's revealed a lot kind of further down the line with Rose, is just loss, and what drives them is is that kind of is, you know, something outside of themselves that they're really kind of like struggling to get a handle on. And I think it's very beautiful, the relationship and their chemistry, that real pragmatic, we have to kind of do what needs to be done relationship that they form. And I'm just wondering how yourself and Brendan, you know, when you're co-writing something like this, how you develop characters that sort of deep and complex, but there's like no clear exposition and everything is kind of handled so deftly.
Well, thanks. Well, so Brendan and I used to be married, and then we got divorced, and then we started working together as writers. So we have a very interesting relationship. But I think, you know, we know each other super well. And one of the benefits of having co-writers, especially when you're writing a two-hander, is, you know, we sort of both identified, or each identified primarily with a specific character. And I know for Brendan, that was Celie. And for me, that was Rose. And it didn't mean that we neglected the other characters as writers, but I think kind of we're the primary advocate for those characters in the scenes. And, you know, in that way, you're sort of able to play out the scenes almost like an actor and really think about it kind of solely from that one perspective. So I love having a co-writer. I have no interest in writing by myself. It's too lonely.
It's very good to get the instant feedback and that instant hit, rather than if you kind of have to leave things to before you can even see them half the time when you're working on something. So it's nice to have that, and then have a second pair of eyes for the rest of the process. Must be handy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So when you're developing characters like this, one of the things that I think is really beautifully handled but never explicitly said is neurodiversity. And I'm just wondering, how do you kind of get a handle on that working with Maren and her depiction of Rose? Like, is this something that was decided, was found in the process?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You know, I have a lot of family who are neurodiverse and on the spectrum, as they say. And I think, you know, people tend to use the word on the spectrum sort of a little flippantly. And I really think of it as a spectrum. So I would say I'm on the neurotypical end of that spectrum, but I have a lot of qualities that could be read that way, which is, I think, partially why I identify so strongly with Rose from the beginning. It was important to me that I think Rose is not, she would have no use for a diagnosis, nor would she seek one out. You know, and that's also true with her sexuality, you know, which is something that Marin and I discussed a little bit, that she's ace, that she's asexual, but I don't think she'd know the term or care about it. You know, and so that was something that I really wanted to, you know, hand to Marin and say, look, there are these qualities. She's sensitive to touch. She's sensitive to noise. You know, she has difficulty reading social cues. Take that as you will. You know, I think for Marin, she had some people close to her in her life where she felt like the characteristics of Rose matched up, and she was using them for inspiration. But it was important to me to let Marin find Rose for herself and not worry as much about sort of representing neurodiversity on screen. I think that as an actor, that might have been that might have made her self-conscious or be challenging for her.
Yeah, I think that's it as well. We're at this new stage where, you know, it's like every Black actor who's on screen, you're just an actor, you know, you're representing a character who's doing a thing, and like that you're not representing a whole society. And I think when it gets to that, like the real, like when we kind of reach parity and equity and everything is kind of there, it'll just be like, you know, a character happens to be neurodiverse, and that's not the point or focus of the film. It's just she just happens to do that. And I think it's done in a very kind of deft way. There's so much warmth to her as well. Like, you know, she presents very cold, but like the kind of the longer we spend with her, which I think is very truthful to to like, you know, how certain people are presenting. It takes a while to like break down the barriers, but she's actually kind of the most gentle and warm of any of the three women, even though she presents coolly to her coworker and, you know, has like a very kind of distance when she's doing her work, but which I think is really warm. And she's, you know, like to the point where I love that, you know, she's vegan and she won't eat meat because she's like, oh no, this is like, I'm so ethical, like this is part of it. And but this thing that I'm doing that may be considered by certain people to be like the worst thing in the world. It's not. It's for the greater good, and it's to heal at the end of the day. So her motive is truly pure, and she's willing to do whatever to herself to get it across the line. And I think that's
Yeah. I mean, that's what we talked, Marin and I talked about that a lot, that like, you know, one of the things is you can read her as cold, especially at the beginning of the film, a little literal minded, a little inflexible. And I think we talked about two things. We talked about how Rose's intent is to be helpful. Like even in this early interaction that you referenced with a coworker where she's explaining to him how to take care of his child, you know, she's doing it to be helpful. It comes across a different way. But, you know, Marin's a brilliant actor and she never plays into what's obvious. You know, the other thing we talked about was the incredible vulnerability of having a difficulty reading people. You know, if you don't know what someone's reaction to what you say is going to be, you know, putting up a wall makes a lot of sense. And like how difficult it is to truly be vulnerable and truly show your own feelings to the outside world.
and in such a male dominated profession in such a kind of
Yeah.
difficult time. So one of the things as well, you were saying in another interview that this was something that you guys were developing in a lab prior to COVID, ready to shoot, and then COVID happened. I don't
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that. This is
I
very
know.
disappointing.
It's yeah, we're not the only story that you know, we're not the only film who's dealt with this, but yeah, we were lucky enough to be chosen for the Sundance Screenwriters Lab in January of 2020. We got to go to Sundance and meet with these brilliant screenwriter advisors and develop the script. We met with Emily Gatto, an executive at Shudder, and she greenlit the movie. We were financed, we were ready to go, and in March 2020, everything shut down. And it was tough because, you know, Shudder stuck with us the whole time. It was months before any film production came back after COVID. And really only the higher budget films came back because the costs of keeping a film set COVID safe were so astronomical that for us, it would have been about half our budget. So we had to wait about 2 years until the COVID costs of our film reduced to the point where we could put as much of the money we had as we had on screen. But yes, it was, I mean, as a filmmaker, it's pretty maddening. I was sitting in my room, you know, storyboarding every shot of this movie, you know, thinking about what I was going to do. And I think there was a point past which that was actually useful.
Yeah, that you had a little bit more time to kind of stew in it and process it. What changed in that time? Because I mean, the world changed in that time as well. Would that have impacted the story?
Yeah, I mean, the script didn't change a ton, but I do think the emphasis of the story changed. You know, there are these sort of elements of grief and wanting to get back a life that you had before that were always present in the story. But I think certainly for me, just as a person, but I think for an audience, really hit differently than they would have pre-COVID. And specifically, like, you know, I mean, it was meaningful to us to show the life of nurses and to shoot in hospitals. And, you know, I think, yeah, it's interesting to think about it because I don't know that any of us can quite retrieve our psyches from pre-2020, but, you know, I think the film lands differently for sure.
Yeah, 100. I think also the healthcare system being so frayed and so overspent. And, you know, I think with Rose's issue with, you know, kind of processing it and dealing with that kind of tail end of it, while Celie is like unable to even manage because if something goes wrong, who's covering your shift? Like, I think that's something that that burnout post COVID, like, because, you know, everything shut down, everyone got to go, oh yeah, this is what like quality of life is like. I get to see my family again. And then when everything kicked back into gear, it went forward like a double speed, and it doesn't seem to have shut down since. So I
Yeah.
think that real isolation, like, because I think what this film did really, really well in her story is address the guilt. You know, like,
Mm.
things happen, it's not necessarily her fault, you know, but you just
Mm.
feel that weight, like, and it's just done sort of beautifully, but it's very, very haunting.
Oh, thank you. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of guilt in this film. I mean, certainly Celia's guilt as a mother, again, not her fault, but as a parent, I'm not. I can't imagine, but you couldn't help but feel responsible if something happens to your child. And then, yeah, what are their medical responsibilities? This film is in a lot of ways. I mean, specifically about the U.S. medical system and their attitude towards people who are pregnant and birthing.
Oh yeah, it's not great. It's not great. It's not
It's
great over
not
here
great.
either.
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And again, about that physicality of going through the system, about how you're not really heard. I think another really good character is Emily, the pregnant woman who's, and you can see her like struggling to be a people pleaser. Like that, it's just so truthful, like dealing with this kind of system and the feck ups of it, like trying to be like I'm trying to be pleasant. And I thought, God, like that's
Mm.
so like there really are like the kind of three faces of womanhood where you have to be successful, you have to be warm, you have to be pleasant. Otherwise, who are you? And I don't know, just talk to me a little bit about even kind of weaving those narratives through the script. Like, did this, if you were kind of working on this for, it was 6 years in total,
Yeah, pretty much.
was there different drafts maybe where different people had different roles, or how, like, it, because it feels very like succinct when you're watching it.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, there were many drafts, many drafts. And one of the things I felt the weight of when we talked about earlier about the weight of representation, especially about underrepresented people on film, um, I felt a huge responsibility to show every type of birth on screen, just every type. And early drafts were kind of, I think, a little less focused in the sense that I was trying to really explain some things thematically about the world. And I'm glad that stuff exited the film. I think ultimately one of the things that I learned at the Sundance Labs was really to trust that those themes that mean something to you will be infused into the story. That if you follow the needs of the characters and, what they're pursuing through the journey of the film, that these other elements will reveal themselves. So the movie did get a lot slimmer and a lot more compact, even through the editing process. There were several beats that were intellectually important to me that when we watched the film, we cut them because they had already happened. We had already emotionally experienced that beat on screen.
Like it's really powerful. And I'm just interested to yourself and Brendan, if you're at the stage where you're like, oh, it's not quite there. Like, how do you guys know when a draft is like finished? How do you guys put it down and come back to it? Like, I mean, if it had so many different iterations, like, are you guys arguing, oh no, she was better at this? Like, how does that kind of creative relationship work?
Yeah, I mean, I think we tend to get to a place that we feel good about knowing it's not finished. And if we have the luxury of time, taking a few weeks off and then coming back and reading the script and really seeing, how we feel about it with a little bit of distance. We work with producer Molly Elfman, who's terrific. And she gives notes. We solicit notes from friends who are screenwriters. So we really try to get, a round of feedback and then kind of dive back in with like a specific set of passes that we want to do. But I think, a screenplay is never finished, and it's really about getting to the next stage. So for example, we knew we wanted to send the script to Marin Ireland to play the role of Rose. So we did a pass on the script at that point to make sure that her character was as strong as possible. And we did the same thing before we went to Judy, which is not to say that we neglected those characters in other passes, but like, a script is so overwhelming that I feel like that's what I've learned over the years is to work in passes and trying to target specific areas one at a time.
Brilliant. And then keep it in theme, because that's something that's so strong, is like theme and how everything links back to it. Tell me as well about maybe raising the finance. Like, I know this is like the moment, this is is it considered mid-budget?
I'd say it's an indie, it's a mid-budget indie,
Yeah.
it's a low-budget film.
Because
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. it's a horror film or it's horror adjacent, as I like to call it. So we knew from the beginning that we were targeting specific companies that specialized in this genre, that also made films at the sort of sub $5 million level, because there are companies that are so large that they won't touch films this small. We met with quite a few. We had, earlier we were attached to another financier, but that we weren't creatively aligned and it didn't work out. So we came into the Sundance Labs with zero financing. And as I mentioned, Emily, who works at Shudder, just fell for the film. And it was wonderful. We had this great meeting. She really loved the project. She wanted to make the same kind of movie that I wanted to make. It was very clear. And I think it just also coincided with a moment in time that Shudder, who, it's the horror streamer that tends to acquire a lot of films after they've been made, was really making a big step into producing films on their own. So it was, the COVID timing was unfortunate, but the timing with Shudder was very fortunate. And as a filmmaker, I'm sure the question is always, how the hell do you connect with these financiers? And it's really difficult. And I would say that for us, the Sundance Labs, the visibility that we got from the Sundance Labs probably was the reason that Shudder wanted to meet with us in the first place.
It's interesting to see that, and it's good to see, again, such strong woman-led content get out there. And I think that's what horror, all the best horror really, it so viscerally explores, a deeply ingrained truth. And I think this is something that really, really does that. And speaking of visceral, the gore in it is spectacular. Now, I saw you had a lot of production design credits. Is this something that you knew you'd really get those visuals and hammer it home then?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I'm really passionate about. Briefly before I worked in film production, which is what I've really been doing most of my adult life, I worked as an EMT. So I had sort of firsthand experience seeing this kind of stuff in the medical field. And then I got a job as an assistant to a special effects artist in New York, a prosthetic makeup artist. So I learned a little bit about prosthetic and practical special effects. I'm a huge George Romero fan, and famously Tom Savini, his effects artist, who was an army medic in Vietnam. I devoured everything written about how he achieved his effects. So it's just my sensibility. I really wanted the practical effects to be right on this one. And I tend to not love digital effects. And then, I worked with Emily Ryan, who's a pathologist at Stanford. She's a, real doctor, and she got a kick out of this movie. So she decided to take some time off and be our on-set medical advisor. And her with Lisa Forst, our effects artist, just created this starkly real work that I think really elevates the film. Frankenstein is an out there, reanimation, I should say, conquering death, is a pretty lofty out there premise. And I think in order to keep the audience engaged, I wanted to make sure that the medical stuff felt as grounded as possible.
And another thing that I thought really adds to that texture is the sound effects. It's so powerful and unique. So this is Ariel Marks.
Ariel Marks was our composer. Brian Parker was our sound supervisor, and my brother Doug Moss was our sound designer. So we had a pretty amazing team. And Ariel is a brilliant composer. I've worked with her a lot in the past. But they all worked collaboratively together to make sure that the sound design and the score were kind of seamlessly intertwined.
That's why it's a very cinematic piece. It's so I do think it's something that really suits. I know kind of people are like, oh, mid-level films, you save your Marvel. And I was like, actually, it's such a kind of attack on the senses, that it's definitely one I would heartily recommend any horror films go see that. It's going to be screening in Still Voices.
I believe so. I hate to not confirm that, but I'm not in charge. And,
of course.
I will be at Still Voices as a guest, and I'm really hoping that Rebirth will be screening there as well.
What has the response been to to the film being seen? Because it's very powerful and it does tackle a lot of things that are close to home for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting, as you say, like, you know, there were reactions I was expecting and then reactions that I wasn't expecting as much. You know, I've heard from a lot of people who have experienced childbirth, specifically people who have experienced traumatic C-sections, you know, women and others who struggle to be believed by their doctors when they come in with a medical issue. And that's not just women. You know, that's certainly trans and non-binary folks. And in fact, a friend of mine who's a man recently saw the film and remarked about, you know, he has this chronic medical issue that he's not really being believed about, and felt really strongly that this film spoke to that. So I really love that it's reached people, I think, outside of maybe the most obvious demographics. You know, I as a filmmaker, you just hope it reaches anyone. And so, you know, that's my favorite thing, is to sort of have conversations with folks after the film about what it means to them.
With regards to delving down into theme and getting to something so deep, but in such a kind of watchable way, have you thought about, say, things that are I presume it has to be something you're so deeply passionate about that you're going to spend 6 years and like financial disappointment to stick with it and all those drafts. What would be something now that you might, I presume something like this will open a lot of doors with regards to, you know, your second feature with a bit more scope to explore something like a bigger world. I'm just thinking, what would be your next move, or what even themes would you like to investigate, or worlds that you'd like to look into?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Brendan and I had written another feature before this that has not yet been produced, called Gordon. It, as you say, was larger in scope. And for a first-time feature filmmaker, it became clear to me very early on that it was going to be impossible to raise the financing for this as my first movie. But it also explores themes that I think I can chew on for 6 or 12 or 24 years, depending on how long it takes to make the next movie. It's about a young boy who in the early 60s accidentally, or may or may not have accidentally, set his sister on fire, and is diagnosed at a young age as a sociopath, and then kind of graduates into the world as an adult, terrified of dating because he's afraid that his sexual or romantic impulses will be confused in his own mind with violent ones. And really what the film is about is labeling and diagnosis, and also kind of what a culture that cuts up women does to the male psyche. So this is like, I think there's so much in there that I don't know and that I want to learn and that I want to dig into. But I also think that, you know, I'm now better able to articulate the themes of birth, rebirth after having made it. And I think that's probably also true for this next one. I just kind of know that there's enough in there that's chewy to me, but I'm sure there's a lot more in there that I'm dealing with subconsciously that I don't even know about.
And you were saying it's like, it almost sounds as well, if it's so character driven, could it be a series? Like, is it that kind of like there, or do you go, oh no, this is the very closed shop?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I don't think that way. And in fact, I'm quite fond of the sort of UK model of TV series where they're like 6 episodes, 2 seasons, and then done, you know, because I like to think sort of in a more closed way about story. In the US, you tend to pitch a series with the hope that it goes on for 27 seasons. And, you know, I find that those stories are not as tightly written or as interesting to me. That's a huge generalization, but as a writer, I tend to think about things within like a feature arc. I would want to learn about TV and kind of that mentality, but I think I would learn about it as a student. Like, hopefully someone brings me on board to direct a pilot sometime and I can observe it from the outside.
But didn't you direct series Did you?
I directed a spec pilot, actually starring Karen Gillan and John Bass, Gillian Bell, a great Nick Kocher, who is a comedy writer, wrote it. So I did. That was, but it was meant to be for an anthology comedy sci-fi series.
Oh, so it is a completely closed.
Exactly. So in that sense, it was really a closed story, and I did not really have to think as a director about what the 17 season arc of this story would look like.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And you also have like you've kind of done a good bit of shorts coming up to this. How important are shorts in cutting your teeth and finding your voice? Like, was that how you were learning along the way, or was this, like, are they kind of spec projects to sell other items? What's your position?
Yeah. I mean, I went to graduate film school, and one of the benefits of NYU's grad program is they make you, I think I made 7 shorts over 3 years. And I do think the best way to learn is by doing, and especially maybe in a cloistered environment, academic environment, where you can fail and not show anyone your short that's not very good, So there's that benefit, but they're not free, they're not cheap. And so I think it's also totally valid to think about shorts in a more targeted way. Is this a proof of concept for a feature? Because I know that when I've gone around with some screenplays before I had a really successful short, people would say, "Oh, this is nice." It's very execution dependent. I'm not sure if you could direct it. So I think one of my goals as a filmmaker, as in the 6 years I was trying to get this made, was to create sort of an undeniable body of work in the form of shorts that I could afford to make, so that when someone came and asked if I was qualified to direct a feature, I could throw all of that material at them. But I think they're fun, and I like watching shorts. I think they're valuable in and of themselves, but economically, you're not going to make a living doing them, at least in the US. I did meet some European filmmakers that seem to be financed by the government, which I'm so jealous of.
Our local governments or our county councils fund them. Like they'll only get like maybe 10 to 15 grand to make like a short, so they have to be very, very, very small,
contained.
But like our local, like you would apply to your local office down the way, and you'd be like, "Here's some money, please, for my short."
It's amazing.
I'm going to film it in that park, and they'll go, "Okay, here's some money." So
I love it because I mean, it really is the only way to learn, is to do it. Film sets are so intimidating, and I think once you look at the process and see that they're done one shot at a time, you can start to believe in yourself and your ability to helm a feature.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much for chatting with us. Oh my God, what a brilliant film. So,
thank you.
Here, we'll see you in.
I'll see you at Still Voices in November.
Thank you so much. Enjoy and safe travels.